So the puppy peed the bed last night?
Your bed?
Your bed?
Oh, yeah.
You had a puppy in your own bed?
Carol Ann thinks he's too little to sleep in his crate just yet. He's 10 weeks, 11 weeks old. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. And he snuggles right up next to her. Well, I got up to go to the restroom, and I came back, and apparently he'd wandered around for a minute because now he has half the bed to work with.
Smart dog.
I laid down, put my feet down. I'm like, oh, he peed like a lot. Like that's the most he peed since he's been here kind of thing. So then I tried to lay there, just ignore it for 5-10 minutes. No. But it's like 2 a.m. It's like I'm not going to change the sheets. I'm like,
You're not?
I got to go get a towel.
That's why I don't have any dogs.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us at the Round Table. We are in the series called Setting the Story Straight, and today's episode we're back in the New Testament talking about the woman at the well. She comes at the well to get some water, Jesus comes to get some water, and then they have a really robust dialogue, and it's a fascinating conversation, and it leads to really many people coming to know Jesus. So we try to highlight some things that are often forgotten or missed in our Sunday school stories, and so we hope you enjoy.
So I guess a couple years ago when we were really formalizing this podcast, you had said you had listened to other podcasts and like the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of a podcast that was all personal, you were like, skip. And then you were like, let's not do that.
Yeah.
And we always do that.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah,
like
we
our
always
thing.
do that. Yeah.
It's our thing.
Yeah.
So I was really excited to bring a story today. And then I thought, do people even care about this story?
Yeah.
And probably not. I don't know.
If they don't,
They can fast forward.
You can fast forward.
Press the 15.
But Joey, we are here for all of it, man. We're
All
here
of it.
for the story.
So I teased y'all I sent you a picture of me with a ice pack on my
I
knee.
didn't know what was
While driving.
Yeah, well, it was a red light.
No. I mean, like the ice pack looked like it was
Yes.
on your knee in the car.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grabbed, so it's trash day at our house. So we have a trash can and a recycle bin, and there was a cereal box and a protein bar box that needed to be taken out to the recycle bin. So I have it, and I'm walking down there, and I'm, by the way, running late, and I didn't like that, but I'm like, I'm a little OCD when it comes to like making sure that all the recycle stuff gets into the recycle bin. So I drop the cardboard boxes into the trash can, but guess what else goes with it? My keys.
Your keys. I've done that.
Okay, so now, those things are tall, all right? Yeah. And so I have to, with my book bag, my coffee, and my water, and I think I was carrying a book, tilt the trash can down. Nathan's already losing it over there. And I reach in there, searching around all the recycle nasty, all right? And the trash can, they're on wheels. It goes, as do I, with the trash can. And I end up inside the bin, and my knee comes down on the edge of the rim there and then hits the concrete.
Any chance you have like one of those front door cameras that we could watch this back? Yeah. Because this sounds fun.
So that's one of those videos that go viral and becomes a GIF.
Sure.
Did the thought occur to you to set those other things down before you?
No, because it was supposed to be an easy drop.
Oh, I see.
It was the keys.
So then my keys were missing. Oh, you're saying when I went to go inside to go get my keys? Yeah, no.
Of course not. Okay.
Because I'm trying to be efficient. I got to go.
Obviously, yeah.
I got to go. So anyway, I do wish, though, that there was a
Me
camera.
too.
I'm sure someone else has a front door. What are those things
your
called?
Your wife or kids see any of this?
No,
or
but
this
I did
just
go
all
inside
you?
limping, and so I told the story, and Selah goes, like Stephanie, she, I'm telling the story, I'm limping, I'm asking for an ice pack, and when I get hurt, Stephanie does have a thing where she laughs, and I can be a little dramatic in my. Imagine that.
I'm just looking at my notes over here.
And so I say, man, I ended up in the trash can. And that phrase, Selah lost it. She goes, you ended up in the trash can. And Stephanie's trying to like shush her to care for me,
Right.
Anyway, so that's how my day started today.
I saw a meme the other day that made me laugh that said, in my mind, I'm still 24, but my back is 55, my knee is 67, and my left hip turns 79 next week.
Yeah.
I like
That's what that story reminds me of.
That's what I felt like, having to drive with an ice pack
on your
my
knee.
Yeah.
So are you okay now?
Thank you. Thanks for checking on me.
Older, wiser, sweeter. That's what I do.
I don't know what the last part is. New dog,
Winston.
Yeah, Winston. That's a good name. It's a
strong, regal name for
Regal's
something
the good
that
word that
pees in the bed. But
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just
Go
on
ahead,
peeing the bed.
Joey. Segue.
I don't know.
I can't wait to see this.
Jeff's the segue guy. He's the one that always comes up with the segues. You got one? Nope. Water. Well,
water,
pee.
Pee is wet.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Oh, I'm having this moment where I'm like, cut that out, keep it. Cut that out, keep it.
That's Nathan's job. Awesome. Hey, so if you didn't know and you survived the last 5 minutes of storytelling, we are in a series called Setting the Story Straight. And these are typical Sunday stories, Sunday school stories that we have heard growing up. And we are rotating between Old Testament, New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament. Last week was Old Testament, the life of David. If you haven't checked that out, I would encourage you to do that. Today is a story that where the last one was a parable. This one is an actual story in the life of Jesus. It's famously called The Woman at the Well. And so today we're going to discuss that, and it is fascinating, just like all of these guys. We've read through the Bible. We've read through these stories. We've heard these sermons or these stories preached in a sermon, perhaps. But when then you go and you sit down and you study what we agreed about today, and similar to the Good Samaritan, the story of a Good Samaritan, is there's so many nuggets that we're just going to have to unpack. And so I kind of want to give a warning to our people is that we are going to have threads and hopefully things that are followable.
Yeah.
But there's just going to be some kind of rapid fire observations we have. They're just cool nuggets that we need to point out.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of little question marks in the margins of my Bible on this one because it's like,
So many.
I wonder what that means. I wonder where that is. I wonder, that kind of
So
thing.
many.
It's kind of fun.
Yep.
So as we start each one of these, we want to kind of recap what we've heard in Sunday school. And it's really been interesting, too, because as I've asked my children about the last several stories or even Life of David, and they've been pretty quick to give me a lot of bullet points. And for this one, they said, actually, they don't know a lot about. It had been a while or something. And so here's the big picture, though, from what I got, all right? They said that what they do remember is that she sinned a bunch. She had a bunch of husbands.
Okay.
And Jesus forgave her, and that Jesus is willing to forgive anybody of anything. So those are the big highlights.
I wonder if they're mixing that a little bit with the woman caught in adultery
John 8, yeah.
in John 8.
Yeah.
Like that sounds like a mashup of those two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even they said like the sin and go no more, which doesn't show up here, but
Right.
that shows up in the other one.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like for whatever reason, when women show up in the Bible, like let's make sure they show up in the worst possible light. Like the David and Bathsheba incident. He raped her, but she was doing the wrong thing by bathing, in the place where she should be bathing, right?
That's funny. That's never how I read it.
We just tend to twist it.
Well, not how you read it, but
How it's
sometimes
been
how it's
read.
been read or presented.
Right. That's how it is read. And
She's
so-
the bad one, and therefore, and that's
She lured him in,
Right.
Yeah.
or whatever.
That's one of the things I want to talk about once we get there. is how we do sometimes misread this stuff with our Western eyes that the audience would not have gone there.
Yeah. What's the traditional way you've heard this presented, though? And again, I guess a good delineation is making sure it's not the woman caught in adultery; it's the woman at the well. It's a different interaction. So, what's the stereotypical way you've heard this presented?
I've heard
before?
it more segmented. Like you either
Yes,
focus
100%.
on Jesus forgiving a woman, like you referenced, or worship in spirit and truth, or like there's a message or a teaching about one piece of the story without taking the whole story.
I think you're exactly right, which is probably why we feel like we're all over the place, is because it is presented really, really in a segmented way.
So we probably should go through it then.
Yeah,
It's also a
just
pretty long passage. Like it's
Yeah.
not like a little 6-verse deal. It's
Yeah.
When I started
page
reading
turn.
it, I was like, this goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of research, and it actually is the longest encounter between Jesus and an individual.
No way. Yeah, well, I think it starts out with a kind of a scene change, right? And I think this is one of those. I don't want to go into the forgotten or not often missed bucket, but Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, so he left and departed. So
the inciting incident.
Right,
Yeah.
there you go. That's
can
good.
we
Good
just
literary
talk
analysis.
about that for a little bit? I mean, just that Jesus wasn't ready yet for that war.
He wasn't ready to take that on, which is really interesting as we keep going through this, because at one point he is going to reveal to this sinful woman
Yeah.
that he is the Messiah, and he's going to say it in no uncertain terms.
Yeah.
But he wasn't ready to tell the Pharisees, the religious people, yet. So
Yeah.
now we're going into other things. But from an observation standpoint, I do find that kind of ironic.
Yep. And then all of a sudden, like Jacob's well becomes this central theme. And oh, by the way, so you had a cool nugget, which was this is the longest interaction Jesus had with one individual. Well, Jacob's well doesn't show up anywhere else in Scripture.
I know.
John's talking about it as if it's this like famous thing in the Old Testament or something. And
Right.
if I was just reading casually, I would just assume that.
Right.
And I started digging, and I was like, what's the history of Jacob's well? And I just thought it was a place in Wimberley. And I guess it was, before then. So anyway,
What did you find?
about Jacob's well, just that it was common knowledge. Like it was a thing. It was a central kind of
Right.
hub. Like the water cooler kind of thing actually
Right.
predates just the office.
Right.
It goes way back to then. That's where like people talked and people gathered, and it's where probably some gossip went on. I mean, just
Right.
think about water cooler.
Specifically women
Yeah,
that would
yeah.
come it was kind of their social outlet.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. So then, then we have in the story, in the narrative, the disciples go away, and here is this woman drawing water there, and Jesus comes and opens up the conversation with, give me a drink, which, isn't great manners, Jesus, all right, if I dare say. He just says, give me a drink, and then there's this ensuing discussion. What other observations do you guys see as you guys go down the line here? What's going on in the narrative?
He gets to the point. He gets to the point pretty quick. Like, give me a drink. How'd you ask me for a drink? If you knew the gift of God and so on, like he just like immediately goes,
Yeah.
this is not playtime.
Yeah.
Like this is serious business
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I love that they're definitely equal conversationalists.
Yeah,
like they
she's
match
sharp.
each other. She is sharp, and they match
Yeah.
each other's. Let's get right down to business.
Yeah.
They're-
And that was one of the notes I made about how she questioned Jesus. She made observations. So it was really interesting. She made observations to Jesus about Jesus.
Right.
That was sort of audacious. And then her questions were also pretty audacious.
Yeah. So they were pretty audacious, but they also show that she's curious.
Yeah.
I think maybe that audacious tone comes more from being a defensive, her defensive posture
Yeah.
of why she was there at that time. And, her life circumstances, I feel like made her have sort of that facetious, audacious tone.
And also, she could have been, I guess, caught off guard because, first of all, she was Samaritan, he was Jewish, which she brings up. He was a man, she was a woman, and yet she didn't miss a beat.
Right. She says, you don't have anything to draw water with.
Yeah.
I mean, she
Yeah.
just comes right back and
Yeah.
says,
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but I feel like she gets such a bad rap. The assumption is all her questions are to divert. And I feel like they're going a level deeper. Well, since you said that, I've been waiting for this answer. And
Right.
it kind of has that, to me, it has that tone. It's like, wow, this is my chance.
I agree, because then later, after the series of questions and the back and forth, and he, to your point, Jeff, gets to the point very quickly, that I have a water that you'll never be thirsty again. And then she goes on, and then he starts to tell her some things about herself, which she also references. She says, "Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet." So she is getting after, and it's drilling down more and more and more of what the big idea here of the narrative.
Yeah, you almost wonder, is she putting him to the test?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I think that's absolutely true.
So then as we progress on, again, we're just kind of recapping the narrative because there's a lot here, is that all of a sudden, so Jesus begins to kind of say to her about her 5 husbands, and now she says, I perceive you as a prophet. And then there's this concept, or this conversation about worship, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit later, because I'm really curious about that. I have questions I don't really know the answers to. But then there's this conversation about worship and worshiping in spirit and truth. And then the woman said, I know that the Messiah is coming. He who is called Christ, when he comes, he will tell us all things. And then Jesus is what you talked about earlier, Lori, which is Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. And that's sort of I think the big moment, the big just building moment here in the passage. And then if I can just kind of summarize the rest, which is, she goes, she starts telling people her story, and then people start believing, and then there's this big moment of like many come to the faith as a result of this interaction. Yeah.
But what we just did was to take out the part where the disciples come back. There's this little interaction where the disciples come back, which was really interesting to me. Like, why do we have this strange little aside where the disciples come back? Jesus talks to them about like his source of strength. And about sort of the spiritual urgency of it all.
Yeah.
And then it cuts back to she goes and tells.
Yeah.
So I don't know where all that fits.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Hope y'all studied that.
well, no, the question I have is he did so much to model for his disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And this would have been a moment in particular because it was a man and a woman.
Right.
And a
Jewish
Jew
man and a Samaritan woman.
like
Mm-hmm.
that he would want to model this. And there's kingdom language in here as well
sure.
about him ushering in this kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was really interesting that he waited for them to leave and for when they came back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a very personal moment
Mm-hmm.
that was quite frankly just really scandalous.
Yep.
I wonder in 2021 it almost would still be
It would have
kind of
definitely raised some
scandalous,
eyebrows, yeah,
and
like-
even more so then. And yet Jesus was unafraid of the way it looked.
Sure.
For what he knew was going to be accomplished through the testimony of that conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think he recognized just how cavernous her need was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you don't keep going and going, your third husband, your fourth husband, your fifth husband, if there's not just this huge need of someone to fill you, someone to love you, someone to all of those kind of things. And I think he recognized that in her. And of course, if we want, we can jump to application of ourselves of just, he's going to fill it. And he knows how just deep our need is.
Yeah.
I think the interaction with the disciples too. I mean, it almost kind of points to Acts 1 when he says, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth." It's like they've experienced exactly what's being said there. It's like we were in Samaria,
Yeah.
we saw this happen. In fact, we saw a lot of people come to faith in that town.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
That's cool. I hadn't thought about that.
It's just the way it all pulls together. It's really cool.
Other kind of we did the overview of the narrative, but other general observations that you see before we jump into kind of pull on some theological threads here.
I kept thinking how Jesus never takes the bait of, I do feel like she is trying to change the subject some, even though I think at the same time she is curious and I think that she is looking for answers. But she does to me, as I'm just reading it from a literary perspective,
Right.
she does take things externally quite often. Like he's starting to talk about internal things and she turns it back externally. But I feel like Jesus never takes the bait on that. He always, even on the part where she says, well, I'm going to question you about worshiping on this mountain. And the Jews say we should do this. He doesn't take that bait. He says, that's what I think he means by spirit and truth. He's like, it's not about where you worship anymore. It's about your heart.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't say he's taking the bait, but I think he is actually answering her question because she asked specifically because the big divide was where should worship happen?
Right.
Should it be at the temple in Jerusalem or is this mountain where they were doing it? And he's
Can we
like,
back
it
up?
doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't matter because I'm here now and it's a new kingdom.
But what was the impetus here? So why was the worship? Because you guys went to the worship thing. I want to go
okay,
there.
yeah.
Why? What happened to the conversation? They're talking about water. He's talking about giving her water that she'll never thirst again.
Then he says, go call your husband.
come here.
So that's the switch. They're talking about water.
So now it gets real. Conversation get real because he is now. What's he doing?
Well, and I wonder too, like, is that obviously Jesus is after something, but would that be an appropriate question in the culture? It's like, I shouldn't be here just talking to a woman at midday, go call your husband, and that will make this more appropriate. I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing there.
Sure. I think I wonder.
I mean, it's in both.
Yeah, I think so because he has got this perception because he also then kind of predictive. He says, "I don't have a husband." Well, you're.
He knows.
He says, "You're right."
He knows what she's
actually
saying.
Right. He says that
and
twice.
he does that to prove to her
Who he is.
Because all through, I mean, that's just kind of where in the flow of John, there's kind of this seeking meta narrative going through the first few chapters of chapter 2.
People seeking after Jesus.
You have in chapter 2, John 2, you have his mom that goes and seeks him to do a miracle, right? You have John 3 with Nicodemus seeking him for answers. You get chapter 4, you got the woman at the well who's seeking answers from him, and then the very next story is the official seeking him to heal his son. Like there's this whole thing. Like to me, that's where that's something that I've missed for sure. I don't think I've ever heard it taught that way. It's like there's like this seeking theme here, and Jesus is he's engaging and inserting himself into situations where his power, his identity is to become known, even though it's not yet fully known.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he's doing this very perceptive. She realizes how perceptive that he is and maybe a prophet. And so go back to the worship conversation because I'm kind of
I
in the dark on
personally
it.
think, so he says, go call your husband. She answers that I have no husband, that whole thing. And so then in 19,
Yeah.
the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet." Next sentence, changed the subject. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain. And you people say that Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. So I think that is her changing the subject. I see that you're a prophet because what you just said to me revealed my sin and knows everything about me. Change the subject. Let's talk about where the proper, if we're going to talk about improper, now let's talk about where the proper place. To me, that's her sort of changing this,
Okay.
deflecting and changing the subject.
Yeah.
And Jesus does what Jesus does, which is to go right back to the heart. It's not about your husband's lady. It's about the water that I can give you that will fill you so you don't have to keep doing this.
Yeah.
It's not about the place of worship. It's about me. And where I am
Yeah.
is where you get to worship, which is why I think he then goes into the kingdom language of the hour is coming and now is. I'm here.
Yep.
And so, go ahead.
Well, I just want to tie something to our listeners here. And we've kind of talked about this before about who we are as a church, but also kind of as a podcast is really reminding people and bringing back people to the heart of the gospel.
Yep.
And taking away distractions. We often so much as Westerners want to go toward external, just as they wanted to do back then. Is everything was so external. The religiosity of our religion or our activity of our spiritualness is to do more. And Lord, I love that you just pointed that out, is just to kind of bring it back to the heart. It reminds me of the Good Samaritan and even that story about how it's always preached to be good, do better, love people. Like, yes, love your neighbor, but, and so I think here it's the same thing. That story went back to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and kind of here too, just the heart of the matter that you will worship. And then when he goes into worship, spirit and truth, it's not about the religious activity. It's not about going to the temple and doing so many things and sacrificing so many, animals and so on and so forth, but just going, it's the heart. What is the posture of your heart? And it is by God's grace that his grace satisfies and satiates anything you could want. Just like you talked about, why would this woman have 5 different husbands? And why would it's because we're chasing after something and God's grace satiates it.
Yeah. So there's a few things there. One, it says the hour is coming when neither, so he's not saying that you can do this now, he's saying it's coming, right? So he's still pointing forward as far as when it becomes different and new, that sort of thing. I think that's just an interesting thing. It's like, it's coming.
But the next sentence says, and now is.
And now is.
So it's the now and the not yet.
Yeah,
the hour is coming,
exactly.
and now is.
Which is classic kingdom
It's
stuff.
classic kingdom
stuff.
language.
Sure.
It's both. It is coming,
Yeah.
but it also is.
Yeah.
Which I think leads her.
I was actually looking at
into
verse 21. Yeah, you're right. Verse 22, it says.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, yeah, you're right. In 21, it just says the hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem you shall worship the Father. And then in 23, you're exactly right, Jeff. Then it says the hour's coming and now is.
Yeah.
And I think that's what leads her to 25 to start thinking Messiah talk. Like she's like,
Yeah.
let's.
So one little thing I want to pull on here a little bit is kind of like referenced earlier about casting her in the worst possible light. That the only reason she would have had 5 husbands is because of sin, promiscuity, these types of things. Like that's for whatever reason where it immediately goes. Because in our culture, that's probably what it would mean more often than not, right? But in that culture, it's like, what if she got married when she was 13, 14 years old, like most girls did, and she married a guy who was 15 to 20 years older, like
he just died.
like most girls
Right.
did,
Sure.
and he died.
Yeah.
And the only way she's getting taken care of is by being married to someone else.
Right.
So what if it was a series of tragedies? Let's just say she did that once. Let's say she actually blew up one marriage once. What are the odds of a woman in a village being able to find 5 husbands if that was her reputation? Probably pretty small, right? The guy she's living with is not now her husband. Well, in our culture, yeah, that would mean they're obviously living together. That culture, it wasn't uncommon for just for legal reasons, financial reasons, for man and woman to live together, kind of set up house, that kind of thing. And it wouldn't have been socially inappropriate. Like they would have been viewed as married in the eyes of the town, kind of thing. So I'm just saying there are other ways to read this without casting her as the town harlot kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so that being said, what if Jesus isn't confronting her sin?
By the way, Lori and I just leaned into the microphone ready to pounce on Jeff.
Who's going first? You or me, Joey?
So what if Jesus isn't confronting sin? What if he's offering compassion?
Well, what
is
if
my
those are the
point.
same thing?
Yeah.
It can be, but the way she's going to receive that's very different. One is, oh, I've been outed. The other is, oh, I've been seen. And I think those are very different places. One could give her a sense of, crap, I better get out of here. Or the other is, you know what? I can trust this guy because he cares about me, so I'm going to ask this question.
Yeah, and I also, but Jesus doesn't out repentant sinners. Jesus outs Pharisees.
But he's very clear. Well,
so what I mean is that at the heart of Jesus and the heart of the gospel, no matter your sin, this would never, unless she was a Pharisee that was like, don't talk to me about my sin. I am religious in this way and that way. Then
but the woman caught in
he'd out her.
adultery wasn't a religious, pious person, and he told her to go and sin no more.
That's right, yeah. But that's I just want to make the delineation that anytime Jesus pursues us, there's never this outing.
Sure.
Gotcha.
No, I'm not saying
Yeah.
he did that. I'm saying what she would have felt.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I'm saying? So, because it's a very kind of benign statement just at face value.
Yeah.
Like it really does get to what's behind the statement.
Yeah.
Is he confronting her sin and letting her know that I know all the bad things you've done?
Yeah.
Or is it I know what you've been through?
Yeah.
And it's probably a combination,
Sure.
right? Because at the end of the day, anytime Jesus talks to anybody, he's confronting a sinner because we're all sinners, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, let's just state that out. But I'm just saying that there's for whatever reason there's a need to somehow paint her as this horrible person that did all these bad things that then somehow goes back to the village and people take her word as highly credible. Well, that's a disconnect too, if that's the kind of character she had,
I
I
don't
think.
see it that way.
Really? Okay.
No, I don't, because 4:6, how do we get rid of 4:6 of the context clues that she's there at noon in the 6th hour? So culturally, the 6th hour is noon. No one's going to the well at noon. The women went early in the morning. And so she's not going.
She's trying to avoid people?
Yeah, she's not going to the water cooler.
Yeah.
She's going at noon. It's hot. No one else is there. The women would have done that before. I just think that context clue suggests that she is an outcast.
Yeah. And maybe even if she had heard of this Jesus guy, well, he had heard, or she had heard, possibly, now I'm kind of putting in some things, but just following your logic, what were the disciples going and doing?
To get food.
They went and got food. And maybe that was very common for men to go do that. So she knew that she'd be alone here in this moment.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden she sees
and
this
she's not.
Jesus guy.
And to answer, why did the people take this? Why did the people, when she went in the village, take her word if she was such an outcast? Because Jesus changes people. And they knew who she was. And she looked different after her encounter with him. And so they went, this lady, I don't know. That's just how I see it. I'm not saying you're wrong, Jeff. That's just context clues.
And then I
make me
guess
go that
another one
direction.
would be, what do you do? There's a bite. There's a weight. The conversation about the water that will not make her thirst anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that bite leaves, or that power behind that statement leaves. Now, what you said is it's a both and she's still a sinner regardless, but she's not this horrible person.
Right.
And I think it's compassionate that Jesus points out our sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is compassionate. I mean, so.
Yeah. Which actually it brings up another point that I want to also bring up, but I don't want to leave this conversation too quickly. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I think too, what that does is it kind of, as the listeners listening, is like, well, where do I go with that?
Sure.
Is I think it's okay for
First
us
of all,
to
we're not
ask-
bothered by it.
Yeah,
totally.
Exactly. It's okay to ask that question is like, hey, what really is going on here? It's kind of like I brought up, last week about the story of David's brothers, like what happened to them. I wish there was like a book about them. Same way, what happened to this woman beyond her going and telling the people and then lives being changed. I mean, disciples upon disciples were made as a result of this story. I kind of wonder what happened.
Yeah. So, and this is, I'm not pulling this out of thin air. There's a lady named Lynn Cohick. She has a book called Women in the World of the Earliest Christians, 2009 Baker Academic. And she's done a lot of research on culture and things like that. And these are positions that she's put forth that actually have gotten some good scholarly kind of thumbs up. So
Right.
it is one of those things that as we learn more about the way the world worked 2,000 years ago, there are things that we may have misread it. One of the things
Right.
I saw, and I tried to find a citation, I could not. I think it was from a book from about 20, 30 years ago, but that up until the Reformation, she wasn't viewed the way we're talking about her right now. It was in the Reformation that somehow she became the town
Harlot.
Harlot, yeah, for lack of a better word.
I'll help you there.
Thank you. I was searching and wouldn't come up with anything near that benign. So thank you.
I can see it on your face.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's like, so something happened in 1500s that whether that was the culture and how culture viewed women then or whatever, that has maybe shaped how we've read this. And I don't know what's added to the story by talking about her that way. Because when I hear messages, I'm reading Dan Carson's commentary, and just it's almost like he can't help. And I love Carson; like he's one of my favorite writers, theologians, whatever. But he can't help himself. Like every few paragraphs, he has to come back to the adulteress or the sexual sin, and it's like it almost doesn't even have a place in what he's talking about. Like there's some thing where we've got to cast this shadow to make the story make sense. I just don't think that's the point of the story.
Well, I don't think either one of those is the point of the story, but I do think that this story itself brings up a lot of big picture issues about how Jesus actually elevated women.
That's key.
That is key no matter how we look at her.
Absolutely.
Jesus elevated women to such an extent that it was scandalous.
For the sake of my sanity, I'm just going to bring this up, and also for our listeners. So the bucket that we're in now is sort of the often missed, or perhaps things that don't get brought up. And so Jeff kind of kickstarted us with this idea of, was she really that big of a sinner? And then now I think something that is sort of being drawn out now is something I think we want to camp out on, is the equitable way in which Jesus. And you said it earlier, which was, I love that Jesus, in an equitable way, called out her sin.
Right.
Like loved her enough, to pursue this woman in a most wholesome, gracious of ways.
Yeah.
To call out.
But also like with
sin.
surgical precision.
Yeah.
I mean, he was like a surgeon. He just went. He just went right after it.
Yeah. For sure.
But I think it's important. So I don't soapbox very often, but as a woman, I probably end up having different conversations than you guys with non-believing women. And I have them all the time. Yeah, that's right, as it should be. But I have them all the time with dear friends and with people I know casually who will just talk about, I could never be a Christian because of the way Christians view women.
Yeah.
And it just, I will usually just say, I get that. I understand that is what society tells us about how Christians view women. But if you would just let me talk to you a little bit about how Jesus viewed women, unfortunately, in the last 100 years, those two things are different. The way Jesus viewed women and the way, air quotes, around Christians view women. And so I do get the opportunity to talk a lot about how what we miss as modern readers is the fact that, the way Greeks viewed women was that they were completely inferior. I mean, if you look up Aristotle and the things that Aristotle said about women, you will be just mortified. Euripides, who was actually one of the leading philosophers and a contemporary of Jesus, is recorded as saying a woman is handicapped by intellect.
Wow.
And so that's how this culture viewed women at that time. How did the Jews view women? Well, interestingly, from what I can tell, God set things up as co-equal stewardship between men and women, right? Like we talked about that.
That's the way God set it up.
Yes, God set it up that way. I mean, think about women had equal access to the law.
Yeah.
And equal responsibility to obey it.
Right.
Women.
But created in His image. I mean, let's go back to the beginning.
100%.
Let's go back pre-fall.
Created in His image.
Yeah.
The Old Testament is full of women like Miriam and Ruth and Rahab and Deborah and Hannah, who God used mightily by their courage and their intellect.
And in the Old Testament, there's a lot of language about really strong feminine qualities that God describes himself as, you know, like a mother bear.
Right.
with her cubs. You know, like there's a lot of language like that where, you know, I want to go back. I mean, I'm on the same thread, but I just want to go back. I mean, Jews and Greeks both consider women second-class citizens.
Well, where I was going
Yeah.
with that was that where this sort of God Jewish view, Hebrew view of women got twisted historically seems
right.
to be during the exile.
Yeah, okay.
So when the Jews were exiled,
Right.
they then began to adopt some of these more Hellenistic views of women. And so by the time Jesus arrives on the scene, the Jews have become more like the Greeks in their
okay.
societal
Okay.
kind of views of things.
Okay,
And so
gotcha.
women at this point, you know, were discouraged from studying the Torah, not because that's what God said,
Yeah.
but because they, you know, because of
Just
the diaspora.
reflecting the culture around them.
The culture around them. They don't sit with men
Yeah.
in the synagogue. A rabbi would never talk to a woman, even his wife,
Yeah.
in public about these things. So when you know, if you put all of that in the context
Yeah.
of Jesus talking to this woman,
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I just want to kind of even double down even more on that. I mean, basically, a Greek and a Jew, both of them could have, and I think you said this as well, like multiple women in their lives without it looking bad. And if a woman, again, even talked to a man, I mean, they were punished, reprimanded,
Great
whatever.
point.
And yeah. And so I just think they were, and I think I read one commentary a while back on a passage that I was reading was that in that culture, like they were looked at as lower than dogs.
Yeah.
And when you understand that and then see the ways in which Jesus not just spoke to women, but treated them and pursued them and allowed them to be a part. Now, there's clearly like this, he made very specific apostles and disciples. And yet there's I think it's somewhere in Acts, like the women that follow Jesus, like they're a subsection of his followers that gets highlighted and pointed out.
Well, and they most likely funded a lot of his ministry.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
like they had means.
Yeah, yeah.
know?
The stories about, I mean, Mary and Martha. I mean, there's just so many. I mean, they were the ones that found his empty tomb.
That's what I was just John 20. Yeah,
I hope what
he
you
appears to
hear-
them first.
I hope what you hear in the thread of this story and what we're trying to highlight is something that's often, missed. Is that the way really the scriptures Jesus treat women and value women is the opposite of what the culture
Yes.
hears and sees.
Yes.
Why? Because of the submission passages,
Right.
And actually, even if we go there, and if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, the idea of the submission is to willingly follow, and it's a place of design, a place of strength. God chose women to be strong enough to bear children. He didn't choose men to bear no children, and so
Clearly.
in the same way, in that same cut and thread of design, it is the power and the strength to willingly follow. But I love on that verse where it says, wives submit to your husbands. They use that verse and abuse that verse and misuse that verse. Like
Right.
men can misuse that verse, say, woman, you better follow me.
Right.
But I think the part is that, what you brought up is it's a loving, gracious thing. It's a gospel oriented thing.
Right.
It's a value piece.
Well, and it leads Paul to write in Galatians 3 that there's neither male nor female. There's
right.
there's no way Jesus was saying
yeah.
that we are not co-heirs.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And so just that the fact that what the gospel does is just like Jesus loves those he saved, loves the church so much to die for them, that's the intensity in which a husband should love and pursue his wife.
Which elevates her.
Which elevates her, yes. And so that phrase of wives submit to your husband actually is more about the husband
Right.
and his actions than it is about what the woman does.
Yep. Those passages too, the fact that he is directing men, hey, love your wife the way Christ loves the church.
Right.
That was elevating women. I know that sounds crazy,
Yeah.
but it was elevating women because he was saying to them, hey, they are worth it.
That's right.
They have worth,
good.
they have value,
Yeah.
that women have a role to play too.
Yep.
Because there is an order to things in the natural world.
Yep.
Women have a role to play as well, and
Yeah.
I will tell them what that role is.
Yeah.
But I'm in charge of these roles.
Yeah, for sure.
mean, if you think about it, is she the first evangelist?
I wonder if you cross-reference.
Yeah, I'd have to look at like the harmony of the Gospels to see
Well, I mean,
timing-wise.
in John's Gospel, though,
In
is
John's
she?
Gospel, I think
she's
she
the first
is.
one that goes and tells because of what she's seen. That's
Yeah.
what Mary Magdalene does in John 20.
Yeah.
Right? She's the first one to kind of carry out the Great Commission a little bit, you know.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that this story, and this isn't, can we go to a different
Yeah, let's
bucket,
go
Joey?
for it. Yeah, you're allowed.
Is it an untouchable bucket?
Yes, go for it.
Okay, so let's go to one of the untouchable buckets. So there's also this theme about how powerful our testimonies are. And I think I forget that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forget how powerful my testimony can be. And whether my testimony is that I've had 5 husbands, or that my testimony is
Or maybe
that,
you lost 5 husbands.
or maybe lost 5
Yeah, Jeff,
husbands.
keep ringing that bell.
I'm not convinced.
But that's the point, is either way, whether it's that I have had a tough life because I've lost 5 husbands, or I've chosen
Yeah.
a difficult life because of, some things that I've done, my testimony is powerful regardless. And I think that's an
really good,
important
Lord.
thread to kind of follow a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the, even though I think, Jeff, you said earlier, the way this passage gets, what we choose to highlight when in Sunday school we're picking the passage. So the living water piece, and then the other piece that I saw a lot was that Jesus wants us to share our story, or Jesus wants us to share Him with everybody. But that really is a key section that is really powerful. And I guess I want to I kind of skipped over it. But there was this I guess verse 39, many Samaritans from that town believed in Him because of the woman's testimony. So it starts there. He told me that all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to Him, they asked Him to stay with them, and He stayed with them. And then after that, so there's this interaction now. They're inviting Him in. There's that seeking thread from John that you talked about earlier. And many more believed because of His word. And then they said to the woman, it's no longer not just because of what you said. So the power of the testimony is really, really awesome. But then we also now believe, or what you said we believe, for we have heard for ourselves.
Love that.
And we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world.
I love that, because her story, important as it was,
Yep.
didn't save them. It just led them to the Savior.
That's right.
And He
Yeah.
did the work.
Yeah, yeah. And that's such a great encouragement to all of us. And one of the things we say, I think, a lot, and particularly in the Equip world of Austin Ridge, is that people freak out about sharing their faith. People freak out about like being offensive to people, and we have to realize that the reality of the thread that is people seeking Jesus in the book of John, like people are seeking Jesus all around us, and maybe they have funny ways of showing it, but people are seeking truth. They're seeking it, and so what sharing your faith is just an overflow. You sharing the overflow of God's grace in your own life, because no one can argue with you about your story. She, the woman at the well, saw with her own eyes something that she just regurgitated, and she just shared God's good grace, Jesus' good grace in her life, and it just lit a flame. And it caused more people to run after truth. And I think that's something for all of us to be encouraged by. You don't have to go to seminary. Seminary's great. You don't have to go to all the quick classes. You should go to all the quick classes because they're great. You don't have to, but just sharing of God's goodness in your life, that is what sharing the gospel is.
Yeah. There's so many little threads you could pull in this. Like the gospel came to an unchosen person instead of the chosen people. The chosen people wouldn't hear it. I mean, just all that in the spirit and truth. I mean, we kind of pull on that a little bit, but man, there's so many little things. I mean, you really could. It is hard because, like we talked about at the first, it is such a long passage. It is easy to take a paragraph and make that the sum total of it, or that kind of thing. And man, just having the patience to zoom out a little bit and look at it in its broader context and ask some harder questions.
Yeah,
is worth it.
We covered this earlier. I just want to kind of recap if we're kind of quote unquote setting the story straight or bringing up some things that are often missed and not brought up. I love the conversation that she processed. She questioned Jesus. He can handle it. He never took offense to it. It wasn't like he set her straight in a way that was like, let me just tell you,
Right.
But it was a gracious, and I think you used the word compassionate, Jeff. I love that. And so there's this one last thing I want to point out. I love this imagery, this nugget that, John gives us. She's there at the well to get water, presumably because she's thirsty. Jesus says, I'm going to give you water so you thirst no more. We actually see justification happen before our eyes. We see her coming to a saving faith right before our eyes when she does this. Verse 28, so the woman left her water jar at the well.
Yeah, she didn't need it.
She didn't need it and went away into the town and said to the people and then shared her testimony.
That's beautiful.
She left her water jar. And I just love that metaphor. I love that picture for all of us, that we with Jesus can leave that water jar, that we have a water that causes us to never thirst again. And then I guess another thread to pull there is what was her immediate action? To go and tell. Mm-hmm. To go and tell. No longer thirsty, to go and tell. Let that be a challenge and a charge for all of us when we think about the woman at the well, not about her sin, but maybe the forgiveness.
I have a question.
Okay. Ooh.
Did Jesus ever get a drink? Like this whole thing started with, hey, give me a drink. And then she's like, no, I have some questions for you now.
I feel like that should have had a put on pump.
It's hot.
Water. Yeah.
It's noon.
It's really, yeah.
Jesus didn't need a drink.
I was going to say, did he need a drink?
Wow, Jeff sighs and rolls his eyes.
Could you hear my eye roll?
And with that,
Yeah, this is really good. Well, hopefully this has been encouraging to you. We encourage you, go open this passage up. It's John chapter 4. Read the
rich.
whole chapter. And then the chapter before and the chapter after, because by the way, this was after the interaction with Nicodemus. I mean, there's so many really cool things here in this section of scripture. So go check it out. Go read it for yourself. And you probably will see even more things than we could even possibly bring up in this podcast.